Good morning, evening, friends. This is your friendly announcer. This is Michael David Cobb Bowen. And today I'm doing something very different than what I ordinarily do, except like when I'm going out on a Friday evening to meet people and talk. Today I have a special guest with us, Mark Neyer. And he said some very interesting things on my post recently at Stoic Observations. And so we're just going to meet today, and you're going to meet us while we meet each other. And we'll talk about a few things that are interesting to us and may be interesting to you. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to meet you. I've been reading your Substack for a while, and I definitely find it interesting. It seems like we're exploring some of the same thought spaces because you got a background in like data processing, data pipeline stuff, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then you're thinking about political philosophy, and I've been doing the same thing. And so the post that you said a bunch of neat stuff in that post today, but a lot of what got me thinking is, you look at the notion, there's this notion of the veil of ignorance. And the philosopher Rawls says that the right thing to do is something like you get rid of everything that makes you you. And you try to imagine making decisions that you would want to jump into the world. If you would be willing to jump into the world, basically pick any one of these identities. So then it's like you're optimizing for something like raise the floor of experience so that nobody's experience is too awful. And
Mm,
then you commented something like, there's this question of, is justice more like building wooden furniture or is it more like a mathematical proof? I don't know
right.
if wood furniture was the analogy, but basically, and I see this myself where I've worked at a bunch of different tech companies, and there's always this disconnect between your models and reality.
Yeah,
And I think when you don't, I worked on stuff that was keeping data centers alive or watching data centers and doing a bunch of monitoring. We'd have situations where uh, there's supposed to be a physical rack somewhere. And our system says it's supposed to be there, but it's not actually there. And then you don't find this out sometimes till you go into the building and take a look at it. So,
right, right.
yeah,
Well,
that
tell me a
part.
little bit about yourself. Where are you right now?
Well, right now I'm in my basement. I'm in my ancestral homeland of Cincinnati, Ohio. So
Okay,
my dad's side came over to America in like 1820s, and
okay.
most of them hung out in northern Kentucky or southern Cincinnati. My mom's side came over some as early as they were taking care of Lord Baltimore's horses.
Mm,
And one of my ancestors was a spy for General George Washington. We think he might have been in that painting where they're crossing the Delaware River.
great, great one.
He they were Dutch, so they did not like the British, and they were willing to give intelligence about how do you cross that Delaware River there.
Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, I spent a little time in Cincinnati, and that's the one with that's the big Ohio River right there. So, like, I first went. I had an uncle who lived in Cleveland, and we drove all the way south. And this was the first time I ever crossed the big giant river.
Yeah,
And then you go into Covington, and then you're into the hill country, and it's wild. We drove all the way from Cleveland to the panhandle of Florida
that
when I
is a
was
drive.
9 years old.
That's a drive.
Yeah, so it was quite a trip and interesting for me. And I kind of like Cincinnati. I mean, especially that neighborhood where the Apple store is. I always try to find two places. One is the MLK Boulevard, and the other
Yeah.
is where there's an Apple store.
Well, you're saying every city has that. Yeah. No, that sounds about right.
So, how did you get into the philosophical side of IT?
So the short, I grew up religious, and my parents are Catholic. Family's been Catholic on both sides for a long time. And when I
Hmm.
turned about 14, I started learning science. And I originally wanted to convince people abortion was wrong. I wanted to be able to prove it to them. And
Okay,
because I learned about proofs in geometry class, right? And a proof was awesome. It was like, it resonated with me. So I start like, okay, what are the axioms I can build on? And I start asking online and I realize like there doesn't seem to be anything there. Like people would just say right or wrong or subjective, you can't prove them. And when I was like, well, no, there's got to be some axioms. There's got to be something that's obviously true. And
right.
as people start pointing back to this God character who's like suspiciously absent, like doesn't answer your phone calls. And like I was kind of distraught
Mm,
because I remember at one point, the thing that really blew up my ability to believe in God was we were brought up Catholic. So there's this whole series of beliefs. And one of them is this idea of you want to get to heaven to be with God. That's like your goal in life. And the way you do that is dying in this state of grace. which you can get among basically once you confess your sins and you've been absolved of your sins, you're supposed to be in the state of grace. So I
Mhm.
start thinking, if you killed somebody right as they walk out of the confessional, they are guaranteed to go to heaven. And like, I didn't want to do this, but you gave me this set of rules that you told me here's
Right,
how the world works. So I look at that rule set. I'm like, well, wouldn't that be a good thing to do according to those rules? But there's no way that that's a good thing to do. Like, that doesn't work.
right.
And then it almost seemed to get even more scary because, like, the Bible's is there's no greater love than to give up your life for your friends. But if you think about it, death is just once. Wouldn't it be even greater love to be like, I volunteer to be tortured forever so that that person doesn't have to? That
Wow.
seemed like even more. And so I wasn't like proud of this. I felt like something is wrong. I went once to my parents. My dad had a PhD in physics from Stanford. He went software business too. So I figured he'd have an answer. And what he said was, if there is no God, then we're all just biological robots. And that's too depressing. And I remember thinking at the time, like, the fact that it's depressing doesn't mean it's not true.
Mm,
And, now I realize, I think he was trying to say something like proof by contradiction is if you assume something absurd, if you assume something that's not true, you eventually get to a contradiction, a logical absurdity, and then you realize, okay, your premise must have been flawed. I think maybe that's what he meant, but he went through his own period of doubt when he was in college. And, what he said is he went to mass on grandpa, he said he wasn't gonna go to church anymore. And my grandfather's like, well, you're not getting anything out of it because you don't put anything into it. And, my dad was like, "Okay, this is true." So he does an experiment, and he goes to mass on St. Patrick's Day, because it was it was that time of the calendar, and he does his best to sing the songs as best he could and participate as well as he could. He said he felt nothing. So he said he
mm.
left the church that day just like, "Okay, like, I've done the experiment, nothing happened." Then he was in philosophy class 4 days later when he said he felt struck by the sure knowledge that God was love and that God loved him. And he couldn't explain it or articulate it. He just kinda, like, knew it. And they were
Interesting.
involved in the charismatic renewal movement at the time, which I've heard of it, I don't really know what it was.
Mhm.
Uh, and he said that a priest told him, "You have a lot of questions, and that's good, but you need to learn to accept there are things beyond your understanding." So, I had thought, he went through this, he's gonna be able to guide me out of it, and he didn't seem to have anything. But
Mm.
what I didn't really get at the time was, first off, I got 8 siblings, so mom and dad were pretty busy, and second, my older brother had just been diagnosed with leukemia.
Ah,
So, I think mom and dad were just, like, they were super busy with that right as I'm going through adolescence, so I went hard take following what I believed to be true, but it was if there's no right and wro if there's no God, okay, I was willing to go with that, but then it's like, well, then there can't be right and wrong either, basically because I can't prove that right and wrong exist, I can't measure them. I have an intuitive feeling about them, but
mhm.
intuition doesn't tell me what's true, it just sort of tells me how I feel, and so I have this crisis, right? I don't know how, like, do you wanna keep going at this layer, or should I
No,
pop up?
it's interesting because there's certain things that are coming up that remind me of what I went through. First of all, I grew up in Los Angeles, and both of my parents were lapsed. My mother from New Orleans was Catholic, grew up Catholic, and for some unexplained but probably guessable reason, she only pays attention to female clerics. So she left the Catholic Church and then became evangelical, apostolic, living out of Revelations, basically. And I mean, I literally had that parent who put on the breadboard, walking around saying the end is near.
Wow.
Uh, so I witnessed that growing up, but it was after I had already been somebody. So I didn't know who this Jesus person was.
Yeah.
And suddenly, she came and said, okay, you can't have that peace sign on your notebook and you can stop drawing the afros on your peachy folder. You need to glorify God and you have to accept Jesus as your personal savior. And so I said, well, how do I do that? She says, well, you have to pray. And
Uh-huh.
then I said, well, will Jesus listen to my prayers? And she said, well, you'll know. And so I just said, okay, well, I didn't have any guilty feelings. I was a kid, 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, I'm talking to Jesus and it seems like it's okay. So we went to this church called Avalon Zion, which is on the east side of Los Angeles. And this is the first time I've ever been in church. And the minister speaks, and every once in a while, people would, Jesus, you know. And when I started reading the room, and
Yeah.
I said it, but I didn't know. I just said, Ia.
Yeah.
And everybody turned around and said, what, what is this kid? Shut up, you know.
Yeah.
So and then, we went through the thing where two or three or more gathered in my name, I will be there. And so I had to assimilate all of this. And then we went to another church, which was in the same denomination, but closer to home. And I just whizzed through Bible class and I got all the stars. And these kids who've been in the church their whole life didn't get the stars. So I'm like studying it like a subject. And then
Yeah.
ultimately, then in seventh grade, I went to a Catholic school. So
Mhm.
now I'm dealing with Catholics who say the prayer's all wrong. And then they have these other prayers.
Yeah.
And then they have this confession thing and the rosaries. And I'm like, all right, here's another thing to learn.
Yeah.
And so it was all kinds of exercises in learning. I was never a baby Catholic or a baby Christian.
Mhm.
And then finally, I go to a Jesuit high school, and here's another way that people are doing it. And then around that time, my father went back to his Episcopal church, and
Uh-huh.
so I went to the Episcopal church, and they were like, West LA casual Episcopalians. And I said, this is more my speed. So
Yeah.
I was ultimately confirmed in the Episcopal Church by the Archbishop at the time. And it was kind of cool. And it was like, if you didn't go anymore, it was okay. Because by that time, I'd studied the Bible. You're confirmed, you're in. And
Yeah.
I had the feeling of not being in while I was non-Catholic going to Catholic schools.
I could
They're
totally
like,
see that. Yeah.
you didn't take your catechism.
Yeah.
I said, but I know all the things that the catechism kids know.
Yeah.
Um, so it was interesting to like be in and not be in. Meanwhile, I'm a baby astronaut. I want to be Batman or Armstrong,
Yeah.
and I had to reconcile that. And so there was always something about cosmology. And I'm like, why do people want to understand quarks and black holes, stuff like that? It's so they can explain the universe, and
Yeah.
then they can, take all the power and glory. So I'm always been philosophical because I never belonged any place.
I could totally see that. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll see what people say. I'll listen
Yeah.
to what they say. I'll hear them out, and I'll make a decision. But the thing that really turned me around, which is maybe the thing that you saw,
Mhm.
was when I heard in 2006 Pope Benedict XVI
Mhm.
in his Regensburg lecture, where he says God and man have to have the same moral capability. And it was a retelling of the creation story
Mhm.
because we understood the difference between good and evil. And
Mhm.
so I just had to believe my instincts. My instincts are, if I don't want to do evil, then, and I can see the difference between good and evil, that has to be the same sense that God has. Otherwise, why give us free will? We
Yeah.
have to have free will, and that way we can choose. And
Uh-huh.
and that made sense across all of the religious sects, because you decide to go to catechism, you finally take your first communion. Those are all choices. And it's an outward expression of an inward commitment. I'm sure you've heard.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, this is why we have choice, because we have to think through things, and we have an innate moral sense. And then coming around to Hobbes, the philosophy of Hobbes, Hobbes starts with his idea of authoritarianism. He says, because people are scared to die,
That
and
sounds great.
everything about justice comes
Yeah.
from that fear, which
Okay.
means it has to be embodied. You have to sweat. You have to get nervous. You have to get the butterflies. You have
Uh-huh.
to be up on that cross suffering to know there's something right and there's something wrong that
Mhm.
got me to this place.
Huh.
So that's
So
how I kind of figured things out
so you're
briefly.
saying you were basically always into philosophy because you felt like you didn't fit in anywhere. And so you had to learn these idea systems as objects of study, not so much like a lens to live out of. So you
Mhm.
study a bunch of these different ones and you just kind of get the habit.
More or less, because I mean, the lessons are kind of universal. And
Yeah, I was about to say, like, the fact that you consistently didn't fit in is almost like there's this ongoing unsolved problem that's domain agnostic. Where, like, you don't need philosophy to drive a nail through a piece of wood, but you need philosophy to start dealing with situations like this appears to always be a problem across all these different scenarios, right? That's when you
Mhm.
start having to engage with this stuff, is if it's like you encounter something, you just, I couldn't find any other way to make it work.
Yeah, yeah, but also, if you're a human being, it has to be accessible to you. And the old saying that there are no atheists in a fox, there are no
Yeah.
atheists in a foxhole.
Yeah.
Faith in God,
Mhm.
however you have that faith, is how you deal with the unexpected. When
So
life throws you screwballs, how do you make sense? How do you logically get through it?
let me hit you with something. You tell me if this resonates or how this works for you. Because I went
Okay.
through a long period where I didn't assert that there was no God. I kept just being like, I don't know. I don't know how I could know. And the way I approach people on this now is, you know what a null pointer exception is?
No, I don't.
So
Oh,
you
oh.
in
Yeah,
computer code.
it's something that throws an error. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
but it's there's a piece of code pointing at something,
Hmm.
and if the computer goes and looks there, it's like I can't access that. There's nothing there. This is called
Right.
a null pointer exception. And for a lot of people, if you start talking about God, their brain throws this null pointer exception where they're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I
Right.
don't think, and so the way I approach those people is say something like, well, you believe in reality, right? You believe there is a reality. And I believe there's, reality too. It's not that I think there's some guy outside of reality messing with it. When I talk about God, I am just talking about the thing that you call reality. But
Hmm.
the difference is I think reality wants something from me and also wants things for me.
Hmm.
And this is a way of like kind of sidestepping all that. Because for a lot of people, they're like, I would believe in God if he'd show up and be like, hey, here I am. But
Well, then everybody would.
right. So
It,
but
it
they
it
feel,
takes no explanation. You step on a nail, you're like, "Ouch, that was a nail."
yeah. So that I think a lot is it, there's a cosmic skeptic. I forget his name. Alex something or other. He's a British. He's got a great British accent, but he basically says his main argument against belief in God is divine hiddenness, where he's
Hmm.
like, I'm open to it.
Hmm.
God's not revealing himself to me. And my response to that is you have to first decide you want a relationship before God starts to reveal himself.
Right.
So again, I want to hear how you think about this. I'm like sending tennis balls over this way. Um, my
No, it's
relationship with
fine.
God
It's
is,
like you at some point you have to say, "Look, I'm a grown up,
uh,
and there's certain I'm going to close my mind to certain experiences, and it's going to undo me if I change my mind." And then you have to assert with some confidence that you think you know everything you need to know to get by,
uh,
or or more than that. And that's kind of the question.
oh, so
Do you?
I got myself into a big mess, like drugs. It started with like pursuit of money. Eventually, I get into drugs. Then it's like I'm on these medications. I'm hospitalized, and what I kept being is like, I don't know how to play this game if I
Mm,
don't understand literally all the rules. If life is a board game, I'm like, I don't know whether there even are victory points, or am I just trying to get money? Like, what am I doing? And I start realizing like I'm going to die, maybe not die, but I'm not going to be able to live a functional life if I
right.
don't start acting as if my basic intuitions about reality are more or less correct. And so I basically had to pretend that reality was a thing because I'd be like walking around hearing other people's thoughts. And
Hmm.
at some level, part of me was like, maybe you're just imagining what other people are thinking, but it felt real. And the thing is, it would weirdly work. Like other people would
Huh.
give me suggestions. I would hear their thoughts being
Okay.
like, come over this way. Don't, and what I start gradually realizing is I am going to pretend that the telepathic channel isn't real. Basically, because things seem to work better if I just pretend I can't hear everybody's thoughts until
Hmm.
eventually I stop hearing all their thoughts. So I came about this faith, and at that point, I didn't believe God was real. Basically, because again, I wasn't getting these verbal responses, but I kept moving in this direction. Like I look at this as the way a machine learning model will eventually converge on a stable representation of its environment, where I gradually start seeing, okay, if I act this way, things work better. And then that became because I read about Popper, who's like, you should be able to falsify all your ideas, right?
Mm,
Karl Popper says, if you can't empirically test it, it might not mean anything. Well, I
right.
love that because it gave me, like something I could be certain of. The problem is you can't experimentally test whether or not there's a reality. The idea
No,
that
you
there's a
can't.
reality,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I love Popper. I love his idea of the open society. I love his idea that there is no framework. And I think I remember my freshman year, I read The Mind's Eye, and that introduced me to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And I said, you can't have all the rules and then have no exceptions.
yeah.
You can either be complete or you can be unexception or without with integrity.
You can either
And
be
so I'm like,
inconsistent
there's a
or
mystery that you have to kind of jump that gap
yeah,
and figure it out. And
yeah,
and there's always going to be a gap. You could never get rid of the
yeah.
mystery.
So
So somehow you have to appreciate the mystery. And how do you do that? Um,
encountered Gödel's incompleteness stuff when I was in high school. I read that Gödel, Escher, and Bach book, and then I completely missed that part.
mm,
Like, so I didn't I had to work my way through because 'cause I'd never been exposed to, like, what you could actually do with number theory and all this stuff. But, yeah, that is where it points is mathematical logic ultimately points at its own limits and says, "There's something beyond me that I can only gesture at." And so I
right.
think that's another angle I use is like, okay, I tell my kids because my kids will ask me, "Is God real?" So I get practice with these conversations. But what I tell them is, "Why don't you point to my hand?" And then so I'm holding my hand up and they're like and they go like this, like, "No, no, that's my palm. That's not my hand. Point to my hand." Like,
Mm.
so then they try doing this. I'm like, "You're not pointing. You're moving your finger out. You gotta." And I'm showing them like, you. What we're really trying to do is perceive holistically. Well, that's what that
Yeah.
Ian McGilchrist guy. That's that point that guy's making is you can have a holistic relationship with reality, and I think your only options basically are either you trust it or you're afraid of it.
Mm. Mm. That's interesting. I'm new to McGilchrist. I've been uh, before I was kind of on a downside, looking at the dark side of everything as rationalism of all sorts seemed to be disappearing. And there was a British poet who talked about that dark stuff. I can't remember his name at the moment, but what I thought about is I like why do we psychologically how do we know if we're healthy psychologically? All
That
right.
is a good question.
If we live a lie, can we actually be happy? Or are we faking our happiness to cover up something that we just don't want to show? And so it's kind of a repetition of Dostoevsky of all the happy families are happy the exact same way because they have a faith in their family. And they
Yeah,
said, my family's going to get myself through this, even if
yeah,
they're incapable of doing it financially or
yeah.
spiritually in any way. So you have to have some faith that you're going to make it because you're not the first human that was born. We've evolved evolutionarily wise. We're not monkeys anymore. And so there's something that happens to us in life that we experience that we either, we're stuck on the slave ship or we jump into the Atlantic.
Yeah, no,
But
that sounds about right. Yeah,
so it's like through all the bad things, something may good happen in the future. And obviously we're here because a lot of people did the right thing a long time
yeah,
ago. So
yeah,
there's got to be some way that we survive. But the question still is, can you survive thinking all the wrong things for all the wrong reasons? And in your ignorance, you're still saying, why are I not happy? And that means you have to explore some more. You're trying to make the world come to your door, and it doesn't do that. So I've always looked at life as something you have to explore. There's people behind everything, so go find the people and
yeah.
learn what they know
That,
because you can't
that's
know everything.
people said stuff like that to me when I was younger, and it just sounded like black magic. Like my grandfather ran a construction company for a number of years. My first job was at this company doing electronic trading, and Grandpa asked, "Well, who are the customers?" And I said, "We don't have any customers. We're just making bets that pay out, and we happen to be good at it." And Grandpa expressed his disapproval. His disapproval. He's like, "A business should exist to provide a meaningful good or a valuable service to the community." And At one point I said something to him about like, well, how do you make sure you're actually making a profit? And he was like, if you're doing good work, profit will be the natural result of that.
Mm,
And at the time, I thought this just sounded like magic. Like, what are you talking about? There's no way.
right.
And now I think it comes down to something as simple as like people have roughly aligned values. So if you're doing something that's useful for other people or you're interested in the same problems, you naturally start gravitating towards each other. Even if you didn't actually see them, it's like the world isn't actually all that big, especially with the internet. So if you go on the internet and you start talking about the same kinds of topics, the things that you post end up putting out signals that bounce back to you and you start getting drawn to people that are
Yeah.
drawn to the same kinds of questions.
That's one of the things, when I had kids and I didn't understand women until I had girls. So it really made a deal of difference. But then
Yeah.
my kids would get nervous about trying something or trying something new. And I said, it happens a lot when they're a teen. And I said, you're in the scouts and you're always supposed to be prepared. But tell me, when you doubt yourself, you should probably go do something for somebody else. Be in service to somebody else
Yeah.
and help them do something that they say they can't do. It's a weird thing. When my kids were in school, they would introduce, especially girls, would introduce themselves like, I really can't do this math. I hate my math class. And they reveal this vulnerability. So they kind of lead with a weakness, and
Uh-huh.
that's how they make friends. So I tell my son, well, let's say you help another kid tie a knot that they can never tie a knot. What do they do when they say thank you? And if they're really grateful, what do they say? I couldn't have done that
Yeah.
without you. And then I said, that's where the value comes. Now I've developed my aphorism, which is trust is the civilizing currency of it's the currency of civilization.
No, that sounds right. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
if you can get somebody to trust you and
Yeah.
then do something good for that person, then they'll want to thank you or they'll reward you.
Yeah.
And that is where everything is.
Yep.
That's where everything is.
But you also get if they have the knowledge that you can solve this problem, that allows them to be useful to literally anybody else that has that problem. Because they like I just had a chat earlier today with somebody that I'm really glad I met. And I'm also thinking of the guy who gave me that referral and even the guy who referred me to the first guy. So there's like three chains here. And
Mhm.
what really is if people know that you can solve the problem, they have that knowledge. Now it's like that solution percolates through the social network, but it does so through your identity. So if this one kid helps tutor, he can eventually become known among all the peers. Oh, he's the one that help you with that specific problem.
Yes, but we believe in generations here in America. So
Uh,
I'm Gen X,
yeah.
and I'm not supposed to believe boomers, and then millennials are not supposed to believe me.
Uh,
And then Gen Z or the next ones are not supposed to believe anything. So they can dismiss us because what we know has been, disintermediated by the next social media thing. And so they don't have to listen to uncle. They don't have to listen to grandpa. They
yeah.
just listen to the TikTok influencer or freaking Mr. Beast. And now they know. Or even now it's Korean dramas are very
Yeah.
popular here. So
Yeah.
it's like
K-pop.
nothing in America that you guys did is of any value to any of us. You built cars. So what? We don't want to
Yeah.
drive cars. We're just looking at our phones. And so we're living kind of in a not only fast fashion, but fast philosophy
Do you
or
remember?
no philosophy whatsoever
Do you
because
remember
everybody
being in?
gets their own channel. We're living in this consumer universe that we couldn't believe, 30 years ago.
Do you remember
So
being in that state yourself, or were you ever in that state of like, I don't need to learn from you because I can learn from my friends?
there was a point where I was like, I am so unique and special. I don't even care what you think about me because you're never going to get it. Right? I had that actually, I
Yeah.
had that, discussion with, David Horowitz. Uh,
Mhm.
David Horowitz used to be a Black Panther, and then when he figured out how corrupt they were, it made him go from socialist to Republican,
Mhm.
and so I had that discussion about him, with him on Slate's Fray when it was brand new, and he says, "You know, you're pretty smart. I can get you to write from Melon Sioff. I think that was the guy who's funding conservatives at the time. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I don't need that. I don't care.
Yeah.
It was just like, I'm so sure about what I know that I
Yeah.
don't care how you regard me because I'm so used to discounting other people's
Yeah.
opinions. And then I realized that at some point you become a father and you're like, okay, I'm the guy. I'm not afraid of anything anymore, and I can give. And it's very weird. I mean, that's the same thing that happened to me with guns. I would never touch a gun, and then I found myself in a situation where a kid got off a dirt bike and pointed his gun right at a Chinese delivery guy with with the basket on the front of his
Yeah.
bicycle, and he's cracking jokes. He's laughing. He just kind of goes into his
Yeah.
backpack, pulls out the gun. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, ah, ha, ha, ha. And I was like 6 feet away from the guy on the bike.
Can't do anything about it.
And I said, if I had a gun, that
Yeah.
kid would have been dead.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm glad I wasn't, I'm glad I didn't have the capability
Mhm.
to take a life. But I was so disgusted by what I saw in that moment. There's
Yeah.
no way I would have let him get away from that.
Yeah.
And so I was that way for a long time
Mhm.
because I refused to learn anything about guns. And then when I finally did, I was
Mhm.
like, okay, now I'm a person who could handle that situation. And I'd get in a lot of legal trouble,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't hesitate. And every
Yeah.
time I went back to revisit that situation in my mind, I said, I would have shot him.
So I'm gonna connect some dots here. It sounds like what you're saying is before you were a father, you had a certain way of interacting with the world, which is almost like fortress me. And
Mm
then when you
hmm. Mm
start having other people besides you that you care about, Fortress Me is no longer viable. Both is like, I gotta do things for my kids. And also, like, even like you encounter a stranger, you can't help that person out of that situation if you can't exert lethal force yourself. Because like, what are you gonna do? To me, this ties back to your piece about Hobbes. You're saying if Hobbes's point is that the basis of politics is people's fear of death, I think, and this just came to me now.
hmm.
Um,
Mm
you have to decide whether you are more afraid of the world or of your own ignorance.
hmm.
And I think
Mm.
when you start loving other people and you start having a sense of responsibility, you realize that your own ignorance can harm you a lot more than the world can in a sense where like I have to choose to trust the world to be able to go out into it to do things. And if I'm just caring about me, I can sort of get a solution that
Right.
works. I wall myself off. I learn
Right.
my environment well enough. And now it's like, I don't have to care what's going on in your head. I don't have to
Right.
care about your experience. I can get myself fed. I can keep this game going. But the moment you start caring about somebody that's not you, that becomes unviable.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like when you recognize that you can contribute and that you can help other people out and you've always been able to take care of yourself, you get mad at yourself for not helping. You get
Yeah.
mad at yourself for not being
Yeah.
engaged or involved.
Yeah.
And then you get that thing like, "Oh, I'm about to retire." And some people say it's so hard to retire. It's like because I've been working and helping
Yeah.
other people and I've been doing real work in
Yeah.
the real world. And now I don't do that. It's just taking care of me and I don't care. I'm just me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta have a mission of some kind.
Yeah. That's I tell you, it hurts a lot when other people just take one look at you and say, "Well, you don't want to work."
Yeah.
That's what happens when all this stuff turns gray.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, what do you care about Arrow and DuckDB? You're still in the Oracle days, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "No, dude.
Yeah.
I've learned all of that stuff, and I want to be on the cutting edge." And
Yeah.
it's really weird because now, unlike in the old days, all of this is not mediated person to person. It's not like you get dressed up, suited up, and talk to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm good to work with." It's
Yeah.
like, no, can you do this lead code problem? And you have
Yeah.
7 interviews,
Yeah.
and then you fail out of the fifth one, and you're just like, Jesus, you people have no faith in other people. You don't
Yeah.
even know how to manage people. And that's the thing that annoys me, not only for my own personal situation, but for everybody who's done this kind of work, who have been disintermediated by by bots.
Yeah.
And we're I just I keep rereading Alex Karp and his Technological Society, and he talks about how all of Silicon Valley went to this complete consumerist idea
Yeah.
and built all these fabulous products, which are just me, me, me.
You're talking
It's
about the
like,
head of, Palantir, right?
yes.
Okay. I haven't read that, but that I could you mentioned this thing, we were talking about intergenerational trust, and you brought up the idea of generations not trusting each other, and
Hmm.
I was about to say, I think a lot of this comes from advertising. The whole
Yeah.
concept of the generations was an advertising concept because they want to segment people, and this is where I think it starts to get, a little bit trippy. When you perceive the world through a frame, and
Hmm.
that frame has causal effect on the world in a way that I'm not saying it is quantum mechanics, but like with a quantum mechanical system, the way you measure it changes what it's actually doing. You collapse the wave function, but you're always choosing how to do that. So advertising and statistical models of people, statistics you have to have the independent identical distribution for it to work, right?
Hmm.
And if you model people as being completely independent, I think that has the effect of separating these bonds, and it's like, I think what advertising does at scale is like, whenever you operationalize any mathematical model, you're kind of nudging the world to align with that model. So if you model us as these separate generations and then algorithms are pushing this stuff out, I think that really does have the effect of like, each of us is not really a row in the database. But if
Hmm.
there's more data stored in reality where it's like, I'm this row in that database and this row in that database,
Hmm.
then there's nothing going like, if there's more effort being put by third parties trying to understand me as like a bag of desires that
Yes.
there is by myself to understand, like, what am I doing? Where am I going? Then I
Hmm.
end up being controlled by all those different database rows
Yes.
effectively because they know me better than I know myself.
Yes. Now this is interesting. I don't know if you read any Neil Stevenson.
Totally.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. So Anathem.
yes. That was my favorite. I've read that like 3 times, man.
So Anathem is, and so what I wanted to do is I want to build a program which is the Lorite. And if you remember the Lorites, they're in the inner circle of the monastical
Are they the
place.
ones that were like, "This idea has been heard before"?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So I want to build a Lorite interrogator in
Uh-huh.
which it asks you all of the philosophical questions and it helps you let you know if your idea is old and if it's been thought before and whether or not you're actually loyal or consistent with that idea.
I love it.
And I think most people don't worry about that. They just wait for the Super Bowl ad and they said, well, I like that one. So that must be me. And they never even develop the discipline to go outside of that. And as universities become credentialing institutions
Yeah,
rather than exploratoriums,
yeah.
people aren't doing that. And we're literally having generations with no imagination.
But you
They
can't
don't go out
explore
and play.
you have to trust God to be able to explore. You have to have more trust in the unknown than you do in the safety of the known to be willing to explore. Because if you believe you live in a universe that's like hostile to life, like if you roll the dice to generate coordinates in the solar system and you teleport there, you're going to die. Most of the solar system will just get you killed, right? Even
Yeah,
if you play the same game on the surface of the earth, you have the same fundamental problem. You end up in the ocean or someplace that's uninhabitable.
right, right,
The
right.
only reason it makes any sense to explore is if the world is inherently maybe not even it's like trustworthy or if it's like the logos, the fundamental like operating system of being is inherently aligned with our instinctual values.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. And again, like I said, if the actual, let's say, ecclesiastical symbol of love is
Mhm,
a red rose,
mhm,
well, God has to make sure that everybody can perceive that the rose is red. Otherwise, they can never know love. And so
mm,
people say, are we living in a simulation? Is it
yeah,
just me that sees the world this way? I'm like,
yeah,
why do you think you're so special that your brain works so much differently than anybody else's brain? You're
yeah,
speaking my language right now that you
yeah,
learned as a baby.
yeah,
And as a baby, you babbled in every language until somebody said, yeah, that makes sense. That's
yeah,
mama. That's
yeah,
dada. Yes, yes. And then so you were all, as a child, learning how to please people who were surrounding you. And
mhm,
fortunately, if you weren't a street orphan,
yeah,
then you learned something about love and you learned something about trusting when somebody put some morsel in front of your mouth that
Yeah.
you just went and ate it.
Yeah.
And it's not until you kind of experience that as like, this baby will eat anything that I put in front of it. It's like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I definitely see that with my own kids of like, I see how much they trust me and how highly they think of me. And it's like, I hope I'm using that responsibly. Like, I hope I'm aiming them at what's worth aiming at. So,
yeah, and it's not like a Modelo commercial where they say drink responsibly. You know that you're going to parent responsibly. you,
yeah.
I bet I know.
Yeah.
But then again, you have to look at the edge cases because there are people who grow up in situations where I mean I watched the the Gagey fight um and I've read stories about people who grew up in neighborhoods which are so tough. It's like I had to learn to fight. I
Yeah.
had to learn to fight. And
Yeah.
there's a monster in me that wants to destroy. And I mean, that's a real part of us as well. It's something that I think we've lost sight of
Yeah. I think
as a
we don't want it to be there, but I think that that thing has to come out eventually. And
yeah.
you either integrate that into a way that helps people be socially productive or it comes out in the worst ways.
Yeah, we still have that. We're still we're still diurnal. We're
Mhm.
still afraid of the dark. We're still territorial. I mean, just like anything. And
Yeah.
there's a mommy instinct and there's a daddy instinct, and they're different.
So that point you mentioned earlier, like we're no longer monkeys, and I think yeah, we're not monkeys anymore. But there's a sense in which there's a right extent to take that because we still remain animals.
Yeah,
We're not just animals, and there's some ideologies that are basically like we're just animals, and there's
yeah,
others that are like we're just minds stuck in these bodies. And I think it's like you really got to walk that line where it's like you can err too far one side or the other.
yeah. I think we're gonna find out though. We're gonna find out that I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that we put in the instinct box that will be to unpack that. I mean, I'm sure that we'll learn dog language, we'll learn cat
Yeah,
language, we'll
yeah,
learn dolphin language, whale
yeah.
language, and it's going to freak us out.
Right,
We're
right.
going to say, "Holy smokes, they're a lot smarter than we thought."
It's not too hard to imagine social networks for animals where they'll start with once they start decoding the language, you could build a social network for dogs where it's like they're barking and they're with their friends or whatever. So that yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen.
Well, it's great talking to you, man. I do have to get going here. I gotta stop, but, it's great talking. Let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, sure. And if you can contribute some ideas to WWID, which was what would I do? How do we make people philosophically consistent?
Well,
Because right now, all of American sociology only looks at race, gender, sexual preference, and
uh
economic status, and people don't know what they are outside of that.
I love that Loride idea. Like, if you could imagine doing this with AI, where it's trying to compress this stuff down and showing people these things that you think are unique. No, you're actually here in this parameter space that you have more freedom on that than you realize. Let
That's the plan, and that's what I'm doing with the end of Western thinking, which what I think you found.
yeah,
So,
I gotta go read some Oakshot now. But it's good to talk to you, man.
all right, take care, Mark.
Yep. Now we just hang out, right?